The next time you're in church, don't watch what the musicians are playing. Watch what their hands are doing when they're not playing. Watch for the nods, the fingers, the fist, because there's an entire conversation going on that stage that you can't hear. And it's exactly how 5, 6 musicians make a spontaneous moment land at exactly the right second every time. So I'm going to translate that language for you because I've been speaking it for over 35 years now. So in one of my prior videos, I pulled back the curtain on how these worship moments in churches are engineered using these 4 techniques, what I call the pad, the key change, the lights and the fog, and the repetition. And the comments blew up on that video. But it was the comments from the musicians that got me, because hundreds of you came along and said, yep, I do that. And you start handing out other techniques that I didn't even mention in that video. There was one comment that said it perfectly. And the comment says, these things get taught from stage musicians to baby musicians in hush tones. In the back of church, stuff like sit on the sus4, like that technique I talked about in the pad, until they scream, then resolve it. And I read that and thought to myself, that is the next video I got to do, because that's the real secret that's happening. This is not just the 4 tricks. This is a whole language that's happening on stage with us musicians. So I'm going to take you backstage. First, the language that we use, which is the secret of how we talk to each other and communicate without you ever knowing. And then I'll show you the secret moves, the specific musical plays that we run that I didn't get to in that last video. So I'll show you the craft and I'll show you why it works. And I'll completely back up and let you determine what it means for churches and church services for yourself. So I'll start with the hand signs and the number systems where you see musicians throwing up numbers to each other on stage with their hands. We use this silent system where you see 1 finger, 2 fingers, 4 fingers, and communication between musicians using those fingers. That has become known as the Nashville number system. And it's really funny how many people think that this number system is new, but it's been around for decades and decades. People have used it in jazz for the longest time. You can see it in jazz music charts and things like that. But it's basically us telling the next musician what chord or what key to play in on the fly. And things like a flat hand basically means to pull it back a little bit, or maybe even slow it down a little bit. And sometimes you'll see the fist, and that just means to either stop, to do a hit on whatever it is. So a lot of musicians, they'll do this thing like they're pounding with their fist. Or sometimes it just means to just stop cold. It's just like stop kind of thing. And then a circling finger in the air means to repeat it or go around again or vamp it out. With this language, a musical director can reroute the band mid-song and you will never see his mouth move. It's designed to look invisible. And the whole point of it is that it looks effortless in front of you and it looks spontaneous, when it's actually a tightly coordinated system that's being run right in front of you in real time in a language that you were never taught. So next Sunday, watch the musical director's freehand. And once you see these signals, you can't unsee them. And you get to decide what it means that the quote unquote spontaneous moment was being conducted the entire time. Now, the second part of the craft in this language is reading the preacher. So the best musicians aren't just watching and playing their instrument. They're watching the preacher. We're watching his body language, his breathing, the moment he steps back from the mic or the moment he starts to rock back and forth, because we know what's about to happen 10 seconds before you do. And we're already setting up the chord to underscore it. See, when the music hits at the exact moment that the preacher reaches his peak, your brain experiences that as a unified moment, like the heavens opened up. But it's not a coincidence. It's a musician who has learned to read a preacher like a book. So is it the Holy Spirit syncing 2 people up? Or is it just a musician who has done it 2,000 times and knows the cues really well? You can answer that for yourself. I'm just telling you, we musicians know how to see that coming. Now, I want to reveal to you some of the secret moves that musicians do, and it's really 3 of them. And the first one is what I call the suspended chord, which makes you feel tension. So a suspended chord is a chord that sounds unfinished, like it wants to resolve. So we sit on that chord under the prayer, under the build, under the moment right before the breakthrough, and we hold it and we don't let off of it. We stretch that chord out, and at the exact moment of peak, we resolve it. And just for fun, I'm going to repeat this whole section that I just said, and I'm going to play that suspended chord under my voice so you can hear what it does. So, a suspended chord is a chord that sounds unfinished, like it wants to resolve. So, we sit on that chord under the prayer, under the build, under the moment right before the breakthrough. We hold that unresolved chord and we do not let it land. We stretch it out, and right at the exact peak, we resolve it. Didn't you just feel and experience that whole thing I just said differently just because of that chord was under it? See, that unresolved harmony creates a physical tension in your body. Your ear is waiting for the resolution that it knows is coming. You hold it long enough, and the entire room is leaning forward without even knowing why. And then the resolution of it hits as a relief, even a release. It's the same tension and release strategy that Hollywood movie scores use to make you cry right at the moment you're supposed to cry in a movie. When that wave of relief washes over a room at the peak, that's a chord that's being resolved after being held for a long time. What that relief is and what it means, that's up to you to decide. I'm just telling you that it's an engineered moment by musicians. Now, the next one is one you're completely familiar with, and that's the shout and the praise break. Every musician raised in church knows what this is. It's that fast driving groove with the specific kick and drum pattern, with the organ riding on top and everybody running around the room from it. It has a tempo and it has a feel, and it does one thing reliably. It gets people standing up, clapping hands, waving, and even running and turning flips in the aisle. And we can drop that shout, praise break music on a dime at any point in the service, and it works every single time. The thing is, fast, repetitive, rhythmically driving music has the ability to synchronize a crowd's movement, and it physically arouses their senses. It gets your heart rate up and it gets you moving. It's energizing, and it's basically the same mechanism of any up-tempo song that keeps a dance floor moving. The body actually responds to the tempo and the pattern before the brain even decides what's happening. So whether what happens during the shout music is actually the spirit moving, or it's an engineered moment designed by musicians that know how to get a crowd moving, that's completely up to you to decide. But I can tell you, the shout, praise break music groove does what it does, and it works every single time, and we know it before we even do it. Now, the next technique is what I call the swell and the crash. So there's two instruments in church that do a lot of what I call the punctuation in music that nobody ever really talks about. One is the organ. And what happens is the organist uses that volume pedal to hold a chord down and swell it and climax right at the right moments. And it provides like this shimmer on top of the music that's happening. And the other one is the drummer's cymbal crash. So the drummer uses that, 14, 16, 18-inch crash cymbal to hit right on the exact moments of climax on the preacher, or he uses it to build up a swell, and it gives this like really regal feeling to everything that's happening. We're literally punctuating the sermon moments with explanation points. And the psychology behind this is that these swells and cymbal crashes and stuff like that are dynamic moments, and your nervous system responds to big surges like that, whether you want it to or not. It's why a drum hit in a movie placed right will make you jump. You land one of those moments right on the preacher's peak, and it feels heavier and bigger and more anointed. And it's all because the sound got bigger, not necessarily the truth. So the next time a preacher says something and you feel it like a big thunderclap, notice whether or not the organ is swelling and the cymbals are doing crashes and swells. And then decide whether it was the weight of what the preacher actually said, or was it just the sound. I'm just putting it out there. So why does all of this even matter? So the thing worth noticing here is not any of these single tricks that I mentioned. It's the seamlessness of it. Here's what I want you to sit with. All of these things that I just showed you, the hand signs, the swells, the suspended chords, and all of that, it's designed to be invisible. The entire point is that you experience it as spontaneous, as organic, as the room, quote unquote, went somewhere. When the truth is, it was conducted, it was coordinated, and it was run by people speaking a language that you don't know who has been executing plays that have been ran thousands of times. And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm genuinely not. But there is a real gap between what it looks like a spontaneous, unplanned moment and what it actually is a tightly organized, conducted performance. And once you see that gap, you can't unsee it. That's the only thing I'm putting here in front of you, and you decide what to do with it. Now, let me tell you why this stuff stays secret, and this is really important. See, the stuff that I'm telling you here doesn't get written down. What happens is a older musician leans over to a younger musician in a rehearsal and just says something like, hold that chord that you're playing right there, hold it and build it up until he sits down. So it's much more of an oral tradition in that manner. It's a guild of sorts. And it's just something we learn on the fly, and you don't learn until much, much later what that stuff is actually doing. And there's a bit of an unspoken rule of you don't explain the trick that you're doing on the people that it's being used on. And of course, I'm breaking that rule right now by telling you what it is. And it's not because I think it's evil or something like that. I've been using it for over 35 years myself. It's because I think you have a right to know the language and the tactics that are being used on you week after week, Sunday after Sunday. Now, let me tell you really quickly some simple things that we musicians can do in light of this information. And it's 4 really quick things. And the first one is that we have to teach our younger musicians honestly. If you're the veteran musician over the younger 19, 20, 25-year-old musician at the keyboard, teach them the trick, but also teach them what it's doing and what it actually means, honestly. Don't just hand them the trick, hand them the awareness. Because a musician who knows what the tool does can choose how to use it. A musician who doesn't know is just a button pusher who thinks he's anointed. Number 2 is know the difference between coordinating and manipulating. So coordinating a band to make sure that the worship service flows is good craft. That's musicianship. Running the signals and the plays to manufacture a moment is something else completely. You're the only one who knows which you're doing at any given moment. Just be honest with yourself about it. Number 3, and this is crucially important, don't perform a language you've stopped meaning. It's possible to get so good and so fluent in this that you're running all of these plays on autopilot without feeling anything yourself. If you've hit that point, that's worth paying attention to, not for the congregation's sake, but for yours. Fluency without meaning is a hollow place to live. And number 4 is you can still play straight. And I said this the last time. But at any given moment, you can decide to be the musician who plays honestly. You can be the musician who decides to support the room rather than working it. You can be the musician who decides to use the language to serve the moment rather than manufacturing it. It's the same skill, but different intention, and you're the only one who knows the difference. Here's where I land, and I'll say it plainly. There's a language being spoken on that stage every Sunday, and almost nobody in the seats in the congregation even knows it exists. I just taught you the very basics of it. Not to tell you that it's fake, I'm not saying that, but just so that the next time you experience this spontaneous moment and the room goes somewhere, you can decide for yourself whether or not it was an actual organic moment or was it something that was engineered and built by the musicians. And to my fellow musicians, the language isn't the problem. We all speak it. The only question is whether or not you know what it is you're saying it when you're saying it. I'll see you in the next video.